Alors, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Tout d'abord, je dois m'excuser car mon français est tellement terrible, alors je vais parler en anglais. Je suis désolée. Alors. And I would like to thank you, the organizers of this fantastic week of Esfahan here in Paris, and I will today talk about the historic integration between the city of Esfahan, especially in the Safavid era, with the urban structure in the Safavid era, with the water system and the water reservoir, which is mainly came from the river. But before that, I think it's necessary to give you a holistic view about the common language, which is a kind of a tradition in the integration and relation between the Iranian city, the cities in the Iranian plateau, in fact, and water networks and water systems. And I will go through the give you a quick review on the geographic and climatic facts about Iran. In fact, that is the Iranian plateau, I guess most of you are familiar with, which is consists of the majority part of Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, also Azerbaijan and Armenia, and some part of Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. We called it kind of the Iranian plateau. And in Iran, we also called it the cultural border of the Iranian societies as well, because there is a really familiarity between Iranian people in the Iran and the people who now lives in these countries also. And in this region, two facts actually: the amount and the mode of the rainfall, also the amount of the evaporation, and water penetration into the soil shaped very various different type of water system all around this plateau. Based on the rainwater, annual rainwater, and according to some Iranian scholars called Mr. Safinejad, this white line, which I draw here, divide Iran into two main parts. The eastern part, with the high precipitation, is with the very low rainfalls, is actually a place for the really more simple water systems with the simple regulations and relationships according to the water system. But the eastern part, with the low precipitation, is it's also it's really a cradle and the place and the house for the main complicated water system, which I'm going to concentrate to this eastern part and talk about some little example in this part. We also could, in fact, generally, based on the water resources, we could also divide the water system in Iran into three groups. The water system based on the underground water, as Sarah totally described, the Ganat system. The water system based on the surface water, the perennial permanent rivers, and also the seasonal rivers. And we have also some really fantastic examples of the water system who shaped and developed based on the seasonal rainfalls and monsoons. I will talk a little just about the Qanat civilization. This part, which I draw here, is considered as the central aquifer of Iran. Iran is divided in 6 main aquifer, but the central wall, central part, which is a place for more than the 70% of the Qanat of Iran, is considered by the Iranian scholars as the cradle of the Qanat civilization. In this part, we have major cities like really important Qanat cities like Nishabur, Sabzavar in Khorasan, Tehran, as Sarah mentioned, Ardestan, Nain, Tabas, Qaen, Yazd, all in the middle of the desert, who in fact formed based on this underground water system, Qanat. They didn't have any other source of water, so the invention of Qanat just led us to build the cities there. But around this central aquifer, in the border, we have some really interesting cities which formed and developed based on the surface water. I mean, even perennial or seasonal rivers. Isfahan, the city I will come back quickly. Semnan, Herat in Afghanistan, Bukhara, Samarkand in Uzbekistan, there are all these cities who, in fact, form a shape based on the systems using the surface waters. Also in the south of Iran, in the province of Hormozgan, Fars, also in Baluchistan, we have some really interesting cities formed based on the just seasonal rainfall. I mean, there is no other source for living, so water resource for living, and just maybe 3 or 4 times a year, there's a sudden runoff of monsoons. Well, there are some really interesting cities like Lar, Evaz, Gerash, and Chaharbahar, and other cities in the southeast. And also, now I will talk about a little about this common integration between, as you see, we have really different types of water system. They're not only Qanat, which is a very great invention, but there are also other systems. But when we look to these systems, how integrate with the Iranian cities, Iranian urban structures, that's really fantastic because you see always there's a common language. I will talk about this common language, and then I will go through it and show how this language, in fact, redeveloped in the Safavid era in Isfahan. Here, I think it's a little necessary to show you how the urban structure of Iran works actually in Iranian cities in the medieval era, in the Islamic era. They most consist of 3 major parts: the citadel, which is the place for the governors; the Shahrastan, which is the main city, and the main city with the main sectors, public sectors, and residential quarters, and Rabaz, which is the place for the small villages and the orchards and all fields related to the main city, Shahrastan. All this part mainly have their, in fact, had their own fortification walls, and Shahrastan and citadel always placed inside the Rabaz. But in some cases, citadel situated in the Shahrastan, some cases near Shahrastan. As we will see in Isfahan, citadel was placed near Shahrastan. And in some examples like Bukhara in Uzbekistan, the citadel situated outside the Shahrastan. Here is the really schematic and simplified structure of the Iranian city in the Shahrastan. We called it in Persian quarter systems, and it means the city consists of two main parts: the public parts, the public sector, which is the city center, as you may all know, with the great mosque, the great squares, the madrasa, great water reservoirs, and all of the public utilities gathered here. And mainly the arterial thoroughfares relate this city center to the main gates, and bazaar actually shaped by covering one of these main thoroughfares. In fact, linked one of the main gate to this city center. It's a kind of a prototype for all Iranian cities. And around this city center, we have residential quarters. All the residential quarters, they have their own quarter centers. They related with the mainly windling and cul-de-sacs to the main streets, and this quarter, in fact, residential quarters, they themselves act as a kind of an independent system for themselves, while they mainly shaped with the kinship, ethnic relationships, or professions, and this is the schematic structure of the city that I will show you how this repeated in all the Iranian cities. I just go through 3 examples, and then will be focused on the Isfahan. This is Semnan in the kind of north of the central part of the Iranian plateau. As you see here, the city is nourished with this small, really naive river called Gule Rudbar. In this place, actually, okay. In this place, in fact, in the north of the city, river reached a place named Para. Para in Persian means water divider. In the water divided place in Para, the river, in fact, came to the calming down basin and divided into 5 branches, and the water conveyed through these 5 branches to the city, which is shaped in the south. The water conveyed to the main pools to reserve during the night, and then the water, in fact, distributes to the city, main city. As you see in the right, here is the Shahrastan of the Semnan, which was consisted of 3 main quarters. In the west, we have 3 detached quarters, which was lately villages in the Rabas, and each of these quarters have their own water pool, water reservoir. Here is an example of these water pools who reserve water for each quarter, and then water distributed through the sub-canal, through the ditches and jewels and nahr to the city, reserve in the middle of the city, and then mainly the wastewater of this system nourished the endowed field that is endowed to provide the expenses of the maintenance of the system, hold the system. This is what happened in one of the quarters. This is Nasar quarter of the city of Semnan. As you see here, we have the city center, we have the bazaar, the water reserved in the Nasarpur, and then go through the city, go through the main street of the city, nourish the quarter centers, reserved in the quarter centers, also nourished some of the mansions which had the right to use of the water, and then passed through to the endowment fields and reserved there. Here is the city center of Semnan. As you see, the water goes through just beneath the bazaar and distribution between Karvansaray and Hammam, the public bath, all the mosque, Tekiye, which is a kind of Tekiye, which is a part of the public utilities related to the Shiism in the Iran, and we can find this place in many cities of the Iranian, especially in the desert, which are the religious places. They really act as the, as you see here, the Tekiye act as, in fact, cover the square. And here is the common urban landscape. You can see the water goes through the, in fact, the canals and sub-canals, Jui and Nahr, all over the vicinity of the city, among the fields, and also in the street of the Semnan, which really shaped the common urban escape of the Iranian cities. You can see this streetscape all over Iran. It doesn't matter which resources provide the water. It may be the Jui provided water by the Ganat, or like Semnan is just water from a really, really small river. Nain is another example. I will show how this language goes through the Ganat water and integrate with the urban structure of the city. The region of Nain has 8 Ganat. 2 of them provide water for the city, the others for the fields and orchards around the city. And Nain has a really classic structure of Shahrastan. As you see, it has residential quarters, citadel inside the Shahrastan, the city center just behind the citadel, the bazaar relating back the city center to the gate, and that's repeated all the history about the structure. And this is what happened beneath the city. The Ganat reached a pool. In fact, unlikely to the Ganat of in Tehran or Khorasan, the Ganat in the central part of Iran, they didn't have mostly enough water. Then we need to reserve water to gain the enough pressure. And here is one of the examples. The water came to the pool and reserved during the night, and then distribute the water through the city in daytime. Just before the gate, water reserve, and after the gate, water start to distribute in many branches to nourish all the quarters of the city. We call these branches in Aj in that part of Iran, in fact. And each Aj goes through the quarter center, also nourished some special houses and mansions, and also the bazaar and the mosque and the Karvansaray. All of these important public utilities have their own portion from this water. In Nain, in fact, in all the cities who used the Qanat system, the water of the Qanat system, we have special places to reach this water underground. One of the most important is Payab, which means in Persian on the foot of the water, Payab. It's in fact, in some cases, really a small room, and in some cases, a very big room, who provide a space just behind the water of the Qanat to, like many other cities in Iran, the water of Qanat is not potable, it's not drinkable. In fact, Nain has two different separated water systems. One, Qanat beneath the city. Another, I will explain lately. It's the water became from the spring nearby and then reserved in the water reservoirs, Abambar, and that's for drinking. But the water of the Qanat is just for the sanitation purpose and the daily consumption. And as you see here in the private Payab, they just gather together to escape from the heat, from the heat of the summer. They take a nap, sometimes eating there in these little or big houses. In the public, it acts like a place for the public encounters, and people gather together, chattering, eating. And that's kind of a public space just beneath the city, near the water of the Qanat. We also have some other, mostly some other architectural places related to Qanat. The sunken garden, in Persian we call the Godal Bakhche, is one of the solutions to reach the water beneath the city, which means we dig, in fact, to reach the water, and then make the courtyard just above the water of the Qanat. Then it's really useful to nourish the garden. And also we have well houses, which are mainly provide the water for public baths and some other public utilities. And as you see, this water goes beneath the city of Nain, and another system come in fact in the surface. It's provide the water for drinking, and this drinking water, just like as we saw in Semnan, goes through the streets and reserve in the public and sometimes in private water reservoirs called Abambar, and just like many other cities in the desert of Iran, we have the Saqakhane, for it's a kind of religious places, all emerge in the quarter centers and the city centers, and that's for using the drinking water. And the water for this Saqakhane also came from the Abambar. And when you look at the city and these utilities, you will see how they gather together in the quarter centers, mainly in the quarter centers, somehow in front of the gates. And in fact, in some of the important, mainly religious places like a mosque and a madrasa, and somehow in the bazaar and the caravansarais. Another example is Lar, really, really different water resources, but as you see, in fact, Lar is the city shaped just based on the southern runoff of the monsoon, Well, here is the Wadi, where 3 or 4 times of the year, the sudden water came to this flow through this Wadi. They need to reserve water for all over the seasons of the year. Then they need to reserve water for the city and also for the agriculture purposes. They made wall barrages to calm the water down and can, in fact, gain the water from the Wadi, and all canals in the local called Mamar pass through the city, reserve water inside inside the quarter centers and around the city center. As you see, the city center of Lahore is really obvious with this great square. And now I will talk about a little about Isfahan, and based on this common knowledge I gave to you as a common integration between Iranian cities, Iranian structures, and in fact water resources. But Isfahan is really a kind of exceptional example among all of the Iranian cities. First, because of the Zayanda route is the only, I must insist on it, it's the only perennial river in the central part of the Iranian plateau. And second, because Isfahan, as in fact third capital of the Safavid, had a really change in its urban structure. We have, in fact, from the Safavid era, the Iranian cities have a little change in the structure, urban structure, which make the Iranian cities kind of different from the other Islamic cities, which we were really similar before the Safavid era. But after the Safavid era, the Iranian cities gained their own unique gesture, in fact. Okay. Here is Isfahan. Isfahan as other city of Iran has different types of water system. The main water system is the riverian, which comes from the river of Zayanda route. And from the river, we have the canals called Madi, and these canals convey water all over the Isfahan plains, city, and all the fields and orchards around the city. In fact, during the Safavid era, they modified the regime of the water because since the capital, since the Isfahan became the capital, the residents really became really huge, and they need to, in fact, nourish the whole the city and new fields with the amount of water. Then they modified the system. They divided the Tehran plain in 7 blocks, and 78 madis nourished all these blocks. But in fact, six of these madis nourished the city of Isfahan and the vicinity around it. And here we see at first they divided the water of the river into the deep portion, and after that in 275 and so on. And they really, in fact, separate water in a really very, really, really amount of water that they need. In Isfahan, we also have 2 other, I can say water system, but water resources. Since in fact, in that time, in the Safavid era and before that, the underground water level was really high, then they also use the shallow wells, which means the wells which are not really deep. And also since this groundwater level was high, then they need to protect the city center, especially the royal center, from this water, this underground water. Then they, in fact, built a kind of artificial canals in this Safavid era. They made a canal, for canals to prevent the groundwater came upper than a special level. And then this wasted water goes to the other fields outside the city. And as you see here, I just want to give you how this water system works. It's in fact, among the river, they mainly use the barrage. In the Esfahan, we have 5 for these 6. In fact, madis. We use 5 barrage barrage bridges, in fact, which have had the role to calm down the water. And then when the water calmed down, it's possible to gain the special portion for each madi. Each madi gained a portion, and after that they separated into other branches and other branches and other branches. We call this madi, jadwal, nahr, juy. All of these branches have their own special names. And then they go through to all over the quarters, residential quarters, and also all over the gardens and fields around the city. Well, it's Esfahan. In fact, when it was in the first time, it was in fact a 2-part city. Yahudiya was the main, and the Sharistan. But at the end, Yahudiya it just grew and became the main city of Esfahan. It's in fact situated near 2 miles in the north of the river, and nourished with the Madi, with the canal who branched from the river. Well, this is the Esfahan in fact, before Safavid, in the Alebuyid, Kakuye, and in Seljuqid also. As you see here, the common structure of the Iranian city appeared here. We have the main city center with the main square, now called the Meydan Kohne, and the great Jama Masjid, and we had also the royal places and all that around this city, around this main great square in between the city. And at that time, city was divided into 4 residential quarters. Also, lately, each of these quarters separated in other residential quarters. And when we look to the city, we can see how the Madi, just like what we have seen in Semnan, goes through the streets and in fact distributed all over the city in the quarters, residential quarters. I just focus on some quarter centers in this part of the city. As you see here, one of the branches of the Madis come to the city, goes through all quarters, link these quarter centers together, and the public utilities gathered around this water because they're nourished from this water. And I just, for giving just an illustration of the Isfahan, just put here some examples of, for example, in the Imamzadeh Ismail quarter, the quarter center is consists of Imamzadeh, which means the shrine tomb, and the mosque, and there is a sacred tree near these. Water came to these and continued to the other quarter center, and then to the other quarter center, which was consisted of a mosque, a tomb of Nizamuddin. This in the middle is the picture of the tomb of Nizamul Mulk tomb, which you can see how the water, how the Mahdi gave the branches to this special building. And also iced house, which was really common in that day in Isfahan and many other cities of Iran, which is nourished with the water of the Mahdi. We have the picture of it here. In the Safavid era, I must quickly review the changes in the Iranian urban structure. In the Safavid era, some new elements, in fact, emerged in the city and linked to the old city center. We have the government district and the Grand Boulevard, which is really, really unique in the Iranian cities in those days, and the Royal Garden, which act as a linked system together. And also in the Safavid era, unlike the residential quarters in the past, we have quarters with really rectangular shapes and straight streets. But before, in the other era, in the Seljuqid and all others, we have the quarters, the residential quarters, in fact, always had the organic shape and something like that. But in the Safavid era, they started to become a kind of regular and rectangular shapes. Well, this is Isfahan in the Safavid era. As you see here, the city center was changed. The new city center is changed in the southwest. In place of, in fact, some Seljuqid gardens, the Nakhshe Jahan Square, the government district, as you see here, linked to this new square, and then the great boulevard in Isfahan, it's a Charbagh, link the city in the north to the south of the river to the new royal garden, Hezar Jarib Garden. Well, at the end of the Safavid era, in fact, the city developed to reach the pure water of the Mahdi. Then it developed to the to the east and south, and also we have new residential quarters in the south of the river for the Christians. In the Safavid area, we have new new Mahdis, and also new portions for the old Mahdis. They are new branches to cover all these great development of the city. All these new gardens and quarters and public areas. But the language is the same. As you see here, this is the Hassanabad, Nahri Hassanabad, one of the branches of the Fadan Mahdi, which nourished some residential quarters. It passed the city through the street, nourished the quarter centers, and also linked all these quarter centers together. Here's the Ali Qoli Agha quarter center. As you see here, this center consisted of a mosque, Ali Qoli Agha Mosque, which is, we have a picture here of it. The public bath, which had the portion from the Mahdi, and the small bazaar, which provide the day life of the quarter residents, just like the other example. But here, since unlike the other example of the Iranian city, we don't need to reserve water. Zion Dawood always had water. So in the quarter centers, we didn't see the Abambar or other type of water reservoirs. But the Mahdi still passed through the center of each quarter centers and nourished the public utilities. But we don't have any element for reserve water here in Isfahan. Well, it's a kind of some examples of the common urban escape inside the city and also in the vicinity, which affected with the Mahdi and Nahr and Jews. Here in the Jolfa, in the bottom in right, it's a Jolfa quarter, and you can see how the quarter center arranged beside this little Jew, which is a branch from Mahdi. Well, in fact, the most amazing thing happened in the new urban elements in the Safavid era. Here we have Nakhchijan Square, which was acted as the new greatest square for the city. You can see here how the two Mahdi, the Mahdi Juye Shah, which was totally endowed for nourished the public utilities, and the Mahdi Fadan, in fact the new branch of the old Mahdi Fadan, nourished the square. They reached the square, but they didn't pass it indifferently. They totally encircled the square in a rectangular way and shaped the escape of the square. In fact, now they're totally ruined and covered. You can see the Nakhchijan Square with its Mahdi in it, but lately it was the Mahdi here in a really, really prestigious way. Another example is Chaharbagh. Well, Chaharbagh as the main boulevard of the city also act as a place to present water. Here you can see a branch of the water of the Mahdi Juye Shah came from the north and passed to the south. And unlike in fact, we have some other example of the Great Boulevard in Qazvin. That was the first great boulevard in Iranian cities. But in that city, we can't see the water passed in the middle of the boulevard. Always water passed behind the trees. But here you can see the water passed exactly just like the Persian gardens in the middle of the street. And when you walked here, you just see water in really ornamental way. Here is another example. It's Charbagh in fact, Qajar era. And I did really compare these two pictures, the Charbagh as the main boulevard of the city, which is really, really compatible with the main access of Main Street in the Persian Garden. In the right, we have Bagh Babur in Kabul, the Babur Garden in Kabul, which is really similar to the landscape of the Charbagh in Isfahan. Bagh Babur is the private garden, but the Charbagh is the public place. Well, in fact, and related to the water system, we also have some interesting bridge in Isfahan. As I said, these bridges mainly act for the water system. These bridges act as a barrage, a small dam to call the water down and make it possible to gain the portion from the roaring water. But also in this era, we can see how these bridges, in fact, barrage bridges, act as a public place. They just transform and act as a public place to give the people a chance to sit beside the river and act as a builder to look at all the ceremonies, which was really, really common in the Safavid era, the ceremonies related to the water. We have special ceremonies called Appashan in that era, and also all other ceremonies which were played in the water, in the Zayanda route. They act as a place for public to look at all these ceremonies related to the water. And when we look, when we focus on on the city, we can trace the Madi and its branches meander all around the city, come to the houses, in fact, not all the houses, because just some special mansions for the high-class society have the right of the Madi. But many other buildings like caravansarais, madrasa, and mosque, they had special portions from the Madi. And you can see here how Madi come to these buildings and shape and transform the court to the little garden. One of the amazing example is the Madrasa Chaharbagh, which is just beside the Chaharbagh street, and you can see how the Madi entered this building in the middle, exactly in the middle, and that go from this building to another building and to another building. It seems that Madi linked all of these private, semi-private, and public spaces together as a wire. Well, here is, I just review that how this multi-dimensional integration between water system and urban structure in Isfahan, especially in the Safavid era, which was the heydays of this type of integration between Iranian cities and the water infrastructures. They totally integrate in all dimensions, and they really act as an urban infrastructure, not only a system. And finally, for me, I just want to finish with this poet of Omar Khayyam. چندان که نگاه میکنم هر سویی، در باغ روان است ز کوثر جویی. صحرا چو بهشت است ز کوثر کم گوی. بنشین به بهشت با بهشتی روی. For me it shows how water system, the Juy, the Madi, the Nahr transform Isfahan to the heaven, to the earthly heaven for the King Shah Abbas II, who, for me, he just want to transform all the Isfahan to the unique garden, as I just show how these small parts and whole part of the city act as really a garden for me, for us. And that's it. Thank you.